railroad get in your blood, and after you work 2 or 3 years, 3 or 4 years, about 4 out of 5 people think if they didn't work the railroad, they starved to death. Well, I guess I was one of them, because I stayed with them 46 years. You get in your blood, and you can't do anything but live it. When they moved trains south, they didn't have opportunities to come back, and they were deadhead and double-headed, bringing 2 crews back up this way.
It was though they were, you were in a foreign world to hear the railroaders talk their own language, and so many of them. The bank lobby would be full.
They're metaphors, the way they express themselves. And I think even more than that, what means a lot to me is I would like for the young people in this community to know about the esprit de corps, the camaraderie that existed among these railroads. They cared about their job, and they cared about their job 24 hours a day. Their families were involved in everything that the man, normally it was the man, did. And this shows that they had a trolley car back then. Santa Fe passenger station. All aboard, gorgeous man.
What is memory? The great naturalist Lauren Isley says that the old people who linger in railroad stations are like brown wasps he has seen in November clinging to an empty nest, as if they still heard the busy hum that filled it in summer. It is a way of controlling time. I tried to speak to this man. He said, "Leave me alone, I'm old and sick." But he'd put on his suit and come to the station. It was once the heart of the city, and he still heard it beating.
I'm walking in shadows I cannot see. Faces, they smile when I follow, flee. Doors without windows, all shuttered tight again. I just might pass this way again. I just might pass this way again. I just might pass this way. I just might pass this way again. The night she is hot, Creole girls they sing. My heart it is pounding, my ears they ring.
I made a film inspired by a pop song I misunderstand by the Doobie Brothers, who are not brothers and not named Doobie, because of this line.
I just might pass this way again. I just might pass this way again. I just might pass this way. I just might pass this way again.
Because we might. We may want to pass this way again. Time is not simple, but the impulse to control it against all odds is simple and enduring. What is more human than to want to remember, to honor our past, to leave something to our children of the way we lived, of the world we understood? Will they not want to touch some changing day in their lives, the mysterious, proud achievements of the dead? And if we want to save a homely building that sums up the pride and technology of an entire century of American life, just to know it survives in the middle of our slick, shiny, inhospitable cities, what is so strange? The first sign of life in an old, unused station is the inclination of people to use it for something occasionally. In Seattle, a coalition of environmental groups got the unused Union Pacific station for a money-raising auction. Tom Brooker, an organizer of the auction, explains.
Excellent location. It's downtown, it's central. You've got parking all around, and you don't have to worry. It's a fine spot.
Sold at 487, 487.
In Hartford, an experimental school uses part of the space in the station.
And over the next 150 years.
To block it off from the rest of the station, the school put up a wall and decorated it. On the other side of the wall, a remnant of the station still operates, with that removal of most of the benches seen in so many stations today to discourage dozing and loitering in answer to some bureaucratic drive toward inhumanity.
Where's the men's room? No men's room here anymore. You got to go over the restaurant across the street.
No men's room in the place?
No, it used to be over there.
In the waiting room, there are still touching reminders of the day when the railroads were proud of themselves. It was Amtrak's thorough paring down of the national passenger rail system that left thousands of stations underused or abandoned altogether within a few short years, concluding suddenly a process begun by the railroads 40 years ago. Between 1929 and 1973, the number of passenger trains dropped from over 20,000 to a few hundred, and the miles of track and passenger service was reduced from 266,000 to 50,000. Remember the radio show? Crossroads of a million private lives, the announcer would say. Gigantic stage in which are played 1,000 dramas daily. The stations were ceremonial gateways to the city, and everyone passed through them. The crowd was exciting and frightening.
Eastern Bank for 140 miles. Flash briefly by the long red row of tenement houses south of 125th Street. Dive with a roar into the 2.5-mile tunnel which burrows beneath the glitter and swank of Park Avenue. And then, Grand Central Station.
I was born downtown, you know, when I was small, about 4 or 5 years old. So we just come down here, like on Sundays and like in the summer, like now, it's nice. You see a lot of people down here. Just come down and watch people coming and going from different places, you know, watch different trains. It was kind of fun to watch and just come through, you know, it's like a family outing every Sunday. It was interesting then, you know, but I never did think it would come to this now.
The last of the great ceremonial stations to be built was the Cincinnati Union Terminal, CUT. It was started in 1931 and completed about when I was born. It was built to last better than I was. A citizens committee appointed by Mayor Lucan to try to save the station found it had under 2 months to raise $1.75 million, and they couldn't make it. So the immense concourse is being destroyed to make room for a piggyback freight operation. The black man in Dino Rice's mural was actually modeled by one of the construction workers who built the terminal. 40 years later, Willie Williams is tearing it down. He is a student at the University of Cincinnati, and this is his summer job.
But it was real nice. It's kind of funny how things go that fast, you know. Here for a while and then just gone like that. I went to Pittsburgh and Atlanta, and both times I flew, and it's just different now. I never rode a train. I've never been on a train. It's kind of funny. Worked down here around this all this time. I've never been on.
While the laborers chip away the concourse, the great half-dome rotunda waits for its own end in an urban Yosemite, surrounded as in the Sierras by the smoke and roar of the automobiles that destroyed its world, awaiting either oblivion or a ludicrous fate as a bus maintenance depot. No airport today, with the possible exception of Dulles near Washington, D.C., gives an arriving traveler the sense of pride of place that the great railroad terminals did, the feeling of a portentous introduction to the city. And this one in Cincinnati was the last one to be built in that spirit.
Ready to receive passengers for the West. That's has that romantic sound even yet. Usually this place is full of smoke and steam and all the things.
George McHugh, Arts and Architecture Editor of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, remembers the St. Louis terminal at its height.
Places between the walkways were pits for the servicing of passenger cars while they were in the shed.
The great St. Louis terminal is for sale. No one wants to lose it, but no viable use had been found for it at the end of 1973. A few Amtrak trains still come in, but its great shed, the largest in the nation, could cover 32 at a time from one end to the other.
This big dark chamber is one of the great spaces in St. Louis. The moldings and details of all of the woodwork up here on the arcade are something that would stagger any budget these days, and would stagger the resources even of a designer, because the whole surface is enriched throughout the building. The stone fitting on the building is perfectly beautiful. It's the gutters even come down through retainers which are arched out. So now it stands as a place of great promise, and we don't know what it promises or who it promises it to. We just know that it's too fine a building to be let go because of a lack of our own ingenuity at doing something with it. We're encouraged by the fact that there seems to be a purchaser for it shaping up. We have no idea what his ideas are.
In Indianapolis, the new owner's plans were known. In fact, they were arranged right here in the city planning department. The city played a key role, doing feasibility studies on making the station into a shop and restaurant complex, and finding a private developer to carry out the project, thus saving a distinctive 19th century building in a redeveloped urban core. The city didn't spend $1 on buying the station. It merely took an option and sold it, building into the sales contract restrictions to suit its plan for restoration. The station is full of fine detailing and a lot of priceless stained glass work, including a striking glass ceiling, now crusted with dirt. The upper gallery, which runs around the main chamber, has obvious commercial potential as a site for shops and restaurants. Even the concourse areas beyond the Amtrak sign, which are not initially part of the developer's purchase, are attractive enough to expand into later if the idea seems to be working. The station promises to become a popular side activity for the city's nearby conference center. Indianapolis saved its station by passing it to private developers. In Omaha, the city will create a public corporation to take over the former Union Pacific station. Here, too, the city planning department played a key role. Alden Oust, Omaha's director of planning, showed me the empty terminal.
The Omaha Union Station was built in the late 20s and opened in the early 30s, 1931. The Union Pacific spared no expense in building a beautiful station, and one designed to last for centuries. Actually, the station was only used for a period of about 40 years until the Union Pacific stopped passenger operations and the Amtrak service was provided by the Burlington Railroad.
It was another of the Art Deco modern statements of the 30s, declaring that Omaha was up with the world, perhaps because it is the home of the Union Pacific. I came to feel that railroad terminal decoration is the most American kind of art. It reflected the balance of forces in a city at its time of greatest optimism. The station is now to become an expression of the past rather than of the future, a museum to be run by a non-profit corporation which the city will charter, just like the Zoological Society which runs the city zoo.
If you want to give some good advice to your communities, try to get the planning departments involved, because the planning departments usually have the architects and the landscape architects that are interested in preservation, and they have the creative imagination to dream up reuse and new organizations to run the building. And that, I think, is a real secret. You've got to find good, viable reuse for the building, and you've got to get a fairly broad base of support, both political and financial. So I'd suggest you get your planning departments, your planners involved in the program right from the start.
This was a railroad station, on the Rock Island Line in Lincoln, Nebraska.
I originated the idea, and the board of directors bought it. No difficulty whatsoever, because the cost would be no greater, if I can put it like that, or less than of a new facility, buying the property and putting up a new facility someplace else. And we can show it on paper. We can show that we can make commercial use out of old property, and we can preserve it for posterity, which if we hadn't purchased it would have been destroyed by now.
Ron Tornblom is the president of Citibank of Lincoln.
I have a hobby. I grew up in a town that had 9 railroads, 9 Class I railroads, and you heard a railroad whistle every 2 minutes. And so when it come to Lincoln, when our bank opened, and then we had to expand to a drive-up, it just fell naturally into converting the depot over to a drive-up bank. It's excellent advertising for us and promotion, because we have people who come from Lincoln bringing their house guests to see the depot.
Ladies didn't shed their clothes in the Mount Royal station when the Baltimore and Ohio was running it to serve the carriage trade in the northern suburbs of Baltimore. Lucius Beebe, the railroad historian, called the station one of the celebrated railroad stations of the world, ranking in renown with Euston Station, London, the North Station in Paris, and the feudal fortress of the Pennsylvania at Broad Street, Philadelphia, the latter both now gone. But today, the Mount Royal Station is an art school, part of the prestigious Maryland Institute College of Art.
Well, it's really great to have a building like this available to work in. A space like this isn't easy to come by for a sculptor particularly. You can find a painting studio in a room, you know, but sculpture studios are a little hard to find, and most sculptors can't afford them if they're just starting out.
This whole place is an atmosphere. It's really hard to explain that.
The station was sitting empty when Eugene Leake, the president of the Maryland Institute, saw it more than a decade ago and talked the railroad into selling it. He's never been sorry he went to the trouble.
Modern architecture, because of the cost factor, has just gotten to the point where ceilings are getting lower and lower. Finally, they're sitting on top of your head. And 8 foot or 8.6 is going to cost you X number of dollars per square foot more than 8 feet. So they're creeping down. You get this awful depressed feeling that you're in a subway somewhere. So the 19th century buildings, like this one in the station, have what architects now call waste space, and the economists say, how can you afford this? You ought to use it. And I think in an art school it has to do with the quality of light, and I think it has to do with the quality of how much space you feel above you if you're a sculptor or a designer. So the station has both, and I think it helps. We were lucky enough to get a hold of a very good architect who was sympathetic to the idea, let's not ruin this beautiful place, but keep as much of the atmosphere as we can, which we did. I don't think you could have designed a better looking library in a new building if you tried for 100 years. Those big arches, which were part of the structure of the building, saving them and then being able to look all the way through. And the old original iron ceiling, we just dropped the new light from there.
I asked Mr. Leake about the cost of conversion.
Far cheaper than new construction. With the purchase and the renovation, it was about $18.75 a square foot. Even then, the average price for building anything close to that in quality or height of ceiling and everything else would have been $25 a square foot.
Well, if you're going to take an old railroad station and turn it into a new building, it seems really cruel and forgetful of the past to just make it into something completely different without really considering the nature of what it was before they changed it. And I think there should be something of the hecticness of the railroadness that was here once. I heard once that this was voted the most beautiful railroad station in America, and I can really see the people really being proud of this place in Baltimore. Baltimore is gradually losing so many things that meant so much to it, you know. I just think it would be neater if there was something left here that was the way that it was, you know.
Go ahead.
That's pretty? I got it. That's all right, isn't it? Huh? Isn't that nice?
I can't believe this is just
Imagine that, huh?
great. Oh, I just can't believe it. I think this is this old thing where you used to put your feet up.
Oh, they want you in there.
Oh, do they? I can't believe it.
Yeah, they go good.
She'll just come right in. I won't want to get out of it.
This is a Hilton Inn, built on the tracks of what was once the Southern Railroad Terminal in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The building, as you know, was designed in 1900 by an architect, Don Barber, from New York, and he entered it in the Paris-Beaux Arts competition, won first prize in that competition. So you can see the European flavor throughout the building with the, particularly the arches and the French accent to the architecture. As the century opened, the president of the Southern Railroad saw the award-winning design in a magazine and said, let's build it. 70 years later, a Chattanooga businessman saw the station awaiting demolition and said, let's buy it. He put up a franchise Hilton Inn behind the station and filled the old terminal with restaurants, shops, and nightclubs. His name is B. Allen Casey. You can see the flavor of the Tivoli Gardens here in this room. We had an architect to draw the plans for the Motor Inn, the Hilton Inn, but there was no architect as such on the development of this terminal. Casey's partner is Harlan Mills, president of the Chattanooga Choo-Choo. And we acquired pictures and we gave them to the contractor and we said, could you duplicate this? Casey and his colleagues essentially designed the features of the restaurant and gardens themselves, from pictures out of magazines and books of places they liked. The Chattanooga Choo-Choo is the first successful commercial conversion of a large terminal. For Indianapolis, St. Louis, and other cities where private developers are buying the grand old terminals, this may be a glimpse of the future. If stations are going to be saved, this is one way. And the crucial ingredient in this model is a commercial dynamo with vision. Alan Casey had experience in restaurant management, and he had careful feasibility studies made before he launched the project. Now, business exceeds study predictions, lending encouragement to investors elsewhere. But aside from the few terminals that lend themselves well to private development, combinations of public and private initiative show greatest promise. It seemed to me that citizens groups alone, or city governments alone, were having a hard time. The problem is to assemble both a user community and financial strength. In San Diego, the railroad wants to build a 12-story office building in place of this, right between the downtown core and the waterfront. Mayor Pete Wilson wants the station and tried to trade it for other land in the redevelopment area, but Santa Fe was uninterested. Then he sought federal funds from the Department of Transportation to buy the station and make it a multi-purpose center to house city transit functions, as well as a shop and restaurant complex. It all depends on Washington.
The only problem is money. Frankly, we are probably in trouble because I'm not certain that we can really find the funding otherwise.
So the station might go?
The station very well might. We have exercised the maximum time available under an ordinance giving a stay to demolition for the purpose of attempting to acquire the site. Wish us luck on the damn thing. We're approaching the day of reckoning.
I finished my journey where it began. The Seattle Union Station had sat empty for 6 months after the environmental auction, but then for a few nights it lit up like a theater. The Junior League was rehearsing for their 50th anniversary dinner and musicale to be held in the great old waiting room. The league members and their husbands dressed and performed as people had in their parents' time, the 40s.
Take your panels back off stage. Take the panels off, we'll see how we get them back on.
They sang Sentimental Journey in a set meant to be a cutaway club car. Most of them had been less than 4 years old when the song was popular, but they had the spirit, and they seemed to love being in the old station. Still, though, no one knew what would happen to the station. What will? In this case, the occasional uses made of it drew attention, and public agencies like the transit system began looking into making it a headquarters. Elsewhere, the stories vary, and some are sad. But I learned from traveling among the terminals and depots of America that more people care about them and the past that they recall than I would have imagined. The stations represent a time of higher hope and lower pace. They are a heritage, visually connecting us to a history of ourselves. Old things around us help us find our bearings. I found Americans more inclined to believe that than they used to be. Perhaps we will not be so quick to rip this root out of the land. We just might pass this way again.
Locked in a room down in New Orleans and the blood's flowing fast. Locked in a room down in New Orleans and the blood's flowing fast. And she is hard, Creole girls they sing. My heart it is pounding, my ears they ring. The spell has been cast down in New Orleans again. I just might pass this way again. I just might pass this way again. I just might pass this way. I just might pass this way again.